Hello friends and fellow bibliophiles, welcome back to Kat's Novel Adventures. In today's video, I am sharing everything I read in the month of February. I had an incredible reading month in February. I am amazed with how many books I read, also how many different reading events I participated in. It's incredible. I really do think that extra day is what's responsible for it. Let's go ahead and get started with what I participated in and some stats and ratings because I was kind of like all over the place. So for February, I participated in 1 reading project, 4 readathons, 1 reading retreat, and 2 book clubs. I read a total of 15 books. 5 of them were picture books. I read 2 fairy tales, 2 legends about mythical creatures, and then a couple of chapters about gnomes. I didn't rate the short stories because I am still reading stories from both of the collections that I got them from, the Mythical Monsters as well as the Gnomes book. And then I have a couple of short stories, or fairy tales rather, that I'm going to be reading from my Grimm's fairy tale collection. As for my ratings, I had 6 5 stars, 6 4 stars, 1 3.5 stars, 1 3 stars, and 1 2.5 stars. It is very unusual for me to have anything under 3 stars. The reading project that I participated in was 5-star predictions with Lindsey at Lindsey's Little Library and Farrah at Farrah's Nightstand. They are fantastic ladies, and this is part of their Book List Thursday series. I was given a 1-word prompt, new, and I had to choose 3 books to read over a 2-month period for January and February. So I announced my 3 books at the beginning of January, and then I did a wrap-up of the books at the end of February to share if the 3 books I chose ended up being 5 stars. I did a whole separate video for this reading project that included Olly by Stephen King. I chose this one for new release by Stephen King. It was released back in September of 2023, and I was very excited to read this one because I am a fan of Olly Gibney. She's one of my favorite Stephen King characters, and this is about more of her adventures. And then I ended up reading a middle grade book, and this was for a Newbery winner, and it was actually a winner back in 2014, and that is Farrah and Ulysses, The Illuminated Adventures. This is a story about friendships, superhero squirrels, and a little bit of self-discovery, but really enjoyed it. And then last but not least, Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. And I chose this one because it's a new to me author. It is a perfect winter read, especially at nighttime. So please check out that video if you want to hear more of my thoughts about these stories, as well as if they ended up being 5 stars. I will leave a link in the description box below. My February would not be complete without reading some folklore, and I participated in my own readathon, Folklore February. It's a month-long readathon where you read anything that is folklore related, inspired by folklore. It could be fairy tales, folk tales, fables, tall tales, myths, or legends, or like I said, inspired by folklore. So it could be something a little bit more modern that has some like fairy tale or folk tale elements to it. So I already did a whole video with my wrap up of Folklore February, but I want to share the books that I read with you, and then you can always go back and check that video out if you haven't already and hear more of my thoughts about each of the stories that I read. I read 7 books for Folklore February, and 3 of them were picture books. The first one is The Frog Prince Continued by John Sheshka and paintings by Steve Johnson. This is about what happens to the Frog Prince after his happily ever after. Then I read Tortuga in Trouble. This was written by Anne Whitford Paul and illustrated by Ethan Long. This is a Little Red Riding Hood retelling. And then my last one is Gallo and the Lion. This is by Erica Yono and illustrated by Laurent Cavazier. This lion right here goes to Gallo's hut and decides to eat his sister. Not a very nice lion. And then I read a novella by Neil Gaiman called Odd and the Frost Giants. It's illustrated by Chris Riddell. This is inspired by Norse mythology. Wonderful book, loved it, and beautiful illustrations. And then I read Grimm Memorials by R. Patrick Gates. This is an extreme horror novel with fairy tale elements. I also read a middle grade book called The Grimm Legacy by Polly Schulman. This is wonderful. It has all kinds of fairy tale elements in it. It's about Brothers Grimm and their magical items. And the main character kind of has a Cinderella type life. And then last of the books is a short story collection called Once Upon a More Enlightened Time by James Finn Garner. This is some politically correct bedtime stories, and they're rather silly. And then I had 4 stories, or I read 4 stories. I didn't have them, I read them. And 2 of them are fairy tales that came from my Brothers Grimm collection. And the first one was The Frog King or Iron Henry, and the second one was called The Riddle. And then I read 2 stories from the Mythical Monsters book. I read about the black dog as well as the boogeyman. And then I read a couple of chapters out of my beautiful Gnomes book. Now my Gnomes book as well as my Mythical Monsters, I will still be reading out of these for the remainder of the year. So as I mentioned, I did not rate any of the stories that I read out of them. I will rate the whole collection when I'm finished with it. I also participated in GarbAugust 2.5 Wasted Weekend, which took place on February 17th and 18th. This is hosted by Olly at Criminale. This is my second year participating in this. It's a lot of fun. You read something a little silly or trashy or lighthearted, something you might not necessarily pick up. And I chose Once Upon an Enlightened Time. I actually vlogged my weekend, and you can check that out if you want to see my thoughts on all of these silly stories. They are based on popular fables and fairy tales, and they really are kind of silly. But I had a great time with it, and I purposely picked something that I could also count for Folklore February. I participated in another short readathon called the Little House Readathon, which took place between February the 7th, which is Laura Ingalls Wilder's birthday, and February the 10th, which is the day that she passed away. This is a readathon where you read anything written by Laura Ingalls Wilder or about Laura Ingalls Wilder's life. It is hosted by Elizabeth at Lizzie Faye Loves Books, Naomi at Naomi's Bookshelf, Lindsey at Lindsey Reads, and Mitzi at Mitzi Reads and Writes. I chose to read their group read, which is the middle grade book, Old Town in the Green Groves by Cynthia Ryland. I also attended their live discussion of the book and had a great time. This is what I would consider a companion book to the Little House on the Prairie series, because if you notice, I said it was written by Cynthia Ryland, not Laura Ingalls Wilder. And the reason for that is this period in Laura's life is considered the lost years. It takes place between the winter of 1875 and the fall of 1877. Laura wrote about this time period, but she did not publish it in any of her books. If you are reading the Little House on the Prairie series and wanted to include this one in your reading, this takes place between the 2 books on the banks of Plum Creek and by the shores of Silver Lake. I enjoyed learning more about Laura's life. I just find her a very fascinating person, and everything that she and her family went through being pioneers back in the day. And in this story, grasshoppers end up ruining their crops, and they're forced to move from Plum Creek to a town called Burr Oak, which is in Iowa. And the reason they move there is because Pa and Ma end up getting jobs working at a hotel. I really do think that Cynthia Rylant did a wonderful job. She followed the same format that Laura did in writing her books, and she also did a terrific job of capturing Laura's voice. There's some happy moments in this story, but there's also some dark ones. There were a couple of places in the story where I cried. I mean, there is a very sad situation that happens that just, touches your heart and makes you feel badly for the family. I really have always admired Laura and her family because they didn't always have it very easy. I mean, their life was pretty tough. I mean, they had to deal with frequent moving, some pretty harsh environmental conditions, and also unexpected circumstances would come up and it would cause some issues for them. But I will say that through everything that they have endured, they always did it with such grace. And I guess it's because they had their faith, they had their family, and they were just very determined to, make it, to be successful in their lives. I really think that this is a heartwarming story. It has humor in it. And between the heart and the humor, it really does wrap around the heartbreak like a cozy little shawl or some sort. But I do think if you are a fan of the Little House on Prairie series and you've never read this book, I would recommend picking it up. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And the last readathon that I participated in was the Mardi Gras Readathon. This actually took place in both half of January and half of February because it was taking place during the carnival season, during the Mardi Gras season. And I happened to be a co-host of this readathon with my friend Laurie of Books, Ink, and Paper. She's the one that actually created this readathon and asked me to join her this year. I read a bunch of books for this. We had a bingo board. I read 2 stories in January. I read for the Set in France prompt, The Little French Bistro, and also The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. I read that one for the ball or elegant event. So I had all the other prompts to finish up, and I only missed one prompt besides the bonus prompt, which one of the books that I read probably would have counted one of the bonus prompts, but the one that I couldn't get to was cake. I just did not read a book that really involved cake or had cake in the title. But what did I read in February? Well, I actually read the group read, which was New Orleans Mourning by Julie Smith. Julie Smith used to live in Louisiana, and my friend Laurie said that she thinks that Julie Smith wrote this book as a love letter to New Orleans because there's so many great references. I mean, if you are from the area, you recognize so much of it. It was written in the 90s, but this is the story of Skip Langdon. She is a rookie cop on the New Orleans Police Department, and the murder that takes place happens on Mardi Gras Day. Chauncey Sanamont is the King of Rex, and he is in the parade, and it is rolling, and he gets shot by a parade goer who's on a balcony, and the person is dressed as Dolly Parton. And so all kinds of craziness ensues after that, and it is a murder mystery. It's pretty gritty. Laurie and I had a whole entire discussion about this book for our group read discussion. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description box below. But this happens to be the first in the Skip Langdon series, and this counted for quite a few prompts. It counted for royalty, for set in New Orleans, set on the Gulf Coast, and also for a crew or a group of friends. I ended up giving this a 3.5 stars. I ended up reading 2 picture books for the last 2 prompts, Chef Creole for food and The Composer is Dead for music. Chef Creole is adapted by Jonette Downing and illustrated by Deborah Ousley-Kader. It is an entertaining variation of the song Aiden Drum, and it is about Chef Creole, who is being assembled by all the favorite foods of Louisiana. You can read it or you can sing it, and I'm going to attempt to sing the first verse for you. It goes, There was a man from New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans. There was a man from New Orleans and his name was Chef Creole. How was that? It's really cute. All the different verses are all the different foods that get added to Chef Creole's body. His body is actually made out of king cake. His hair is made of rice and his eyes are made of red beans. It is just really delightful. I do think it is a wonderful introduction for children to learn about favorite foods of Louisiana. And it also teaches patterning. It also kind of connects music with literature. And the illustrations are really whimsical. Also, there is a glossary at the back of the book that talks about the foods that are mentioned in the story and also a little bit of history. Like, I'm not sure if y'all realize why we have red beans and rice on Monday, but it says, a dish traditionally served in Louisiana on Monday because that day was wash day. The meal could be cooked slowly all day without much fuss while the laundry was washed. At the end of the day, the laundry would be clean and the beans would be ready to eat. But really, such a cute little story. I really did enjoy it, especially because I'm from Louisiana and I recognize all of these foods. I've eaten all of these foods. And this ended up being a 4-star read for me. And the second picture book is The Composer is Dead, written by Lemony Snicket, illustrated by Carson Ellis, music composed by Nathaniel Stuckey, and music performed by the San Francisco Symphony. Yes, you heard it, music, because this is a story about murder and music. The composer is dead, and the inspector is on the case to solve this murder, and he's questioning all the suspects, which happen to be musical instruments. Bravo! We're talking about a clever plot, some wonderful illustrations, and some beautiful music. The first time I read this story, I enjoyed it. It would have been a 4-star read for me, but I went ahead and reread it because at the front of my book, I have a CD, if you can see that. And I decided, let me play the CD and see, how it is, because apparently there's music involved. I mean, it is being performed by the San Francisco Symphony. And oh my goodness, my level of enjoyment bumped up a whole star. So this is a 5-star read for me. And the narration is by Lemony Snicket, who has a whimsical sense of humor. The music is beautiful. I love the inspector. The inspector looks like Hercule Poirot to me, and you know how I love Agatha Christie and Hercule Poirot. So it was just neat looking at the pictures and following along while listening to the music and the narration. I think that anyone who loves music will have an appreciation for this book, whether you're a child or an adult. I do think it's an engaging story for children to learn about classical music, about instruments that are played in an orchestra. Also, it has a very rich vocabulary. You've got figurative language in it, and you also have some personification because the instruments act like people. I mean, they are the suspects in our story. It also is a great way of combining music and literature together. And I would highly recommend listening to it with the narration and the music if you can get a hold of the story. But like I said, it was a 5-star read for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. On February 23rd to February 24th, I attended a 24-hour reading retreat hosted by the Booktube Besties, and I was so excited. I got to attend another one. The first one I ever attended was back in July. It is hosted by Krista at Books and Jams, Amanda at On the Middle Bookshelf, Lindsey at Lindsey's Little Library, and Sarah at Sarah's Nightstand. We had so much fun. There are sprints, there are recommendations, games, hangouts, discussions about the group read and other type of discussions that are book related. It's a great way to make some book friends and also discover some new booktubers. I chose to read the group read for the reading retreat, and that was The Golden Spoon, written by Jessa Maxwell. This is her debut novel. It is a murder mystery that takes place on a historic Victorian estate owned by baker extraordinaire Betsy Martin. She is also the host of a popular baking competition called Bake Week, which takes place on the grounds of the estate. There are 6 bakers who are chosen for this particular competition, and they're very excited to be there. And they come from all walks of life, and they all have their own little backstories and secrets. And as the competition begins, some strange things start to happen. And then there is a murder. And all of the people who are connected, cast, crew, guest, even the contestants, everyone is considered a suspect. The Golden Spoon has cozy mystery vibes with sinister undertones. It kind of reminds me of an Agatha Christie novel, with its pacing and its setting being like a locked room mystery. Also plenty of characters, and all of them are suspects and they have their secrets. I love that it was told from multiple points of view. Really enjoyed the setting. Love the premise that a murder happens at a baking competition. Also, I think the characters are developed enough that you know who to love and who to loathe. I really loved Olly. She was very endearing. And also Gerard, who is kind of an oddball, but humorous. He adds the humor factor to it. But I think it was a quick and easy read. There were lots of delicious desserts described. In fact, I wish they had a companion cookbook to this book, because I might buy it and see if I could get somebody to bake me something. But one little thing I wanted to mention is that I listened to half of it on audio. I read the first half with my eyeballs, and then I listened to the second half and really enjoyed it and was able to keep up with it. And I really do think a lot has to do with the fact that it had a full cast and being from the multiple points of view, and then it being a mystery. Also the fact that I started it with my eyeballs and was really into it and knew who my characters were and where the story was going. But that makes me excited. It's my first audiobook that I've listened to in 2024, and that's a big deal because I have a hard time listening to audiobooks. But anyway, with all that being said, I really did enjoy it, and I would read more stuff by Jessa Maxwell. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I read 2 books for book clubs in February, and the first one was for the Midnight Book Society, which is run by my awesome friend Kelsi at Slime and Slashers. Her book club is open to anyone who wants to participate. She generally tends to read horror, but occasionally she'll read some literary fiction or something nostalgic. And for the month of February, she chose Grim Memorials by R. Patrick Gates. And the reason she chose it was for Folklore February, because it is an extreme horror novel with fairy tale elements. I will tell you that I ended up giving it 2.5 stars because it is extreme horror, which is not my cup of tea. So I would say if you are interested in this book, proceed with caution with your reading, because there are some very gruesome, gory details and some content that's a little off-putting. But I also joined her and Nathaniel Toll, who is the author of Pumpkin Cinema and who happened to be a student of R. Patrick Gates at one time in his creative writing class. And he and Kelsi and I had a discussion on Kelsi's channel where we discussed this book. We had a great time discussing it, I have to admit. But anyway, if you want to check that discussion out, I will leave a link in the description box below. For the Cozy Cottage Book Club, I started reading The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady by Edith Holden. Yes, I started it. I did not finish it, and it's not because it was not interesting. I did not DNF it. It is a cozy read that spans 1 year in the life of Edith Holden in the English countryside, and it takes place in the year of 1906. The reason I didn't finish it is because it is really dense. There's a lot to this book, and there was no way I could finish it in the few weeks that I had before our meeting for the Cozy Cottage Book Club. In fact, I was not the only one that could not finish it. In fact, we all kind of agreed that it is the type of book that needs to be read within the year. And so that's what I've decided to do. I had a stopping point, and I've decided that every month I'm going to read the entries for that particular month because it's full of beautiful illustrations. It has the diary entries, of course, but there's a lot of information about the seasons, some holidays, some feast days for the saints. There's information about the different animals and the plants that Edith comes in contact with. But it really is a lovely book. I mean, it's very beautiful, and I'm excited to have it in my library. Let's put it that way. So I will do pretty much a more extensive review at the end of the year where I can rate it and share some more details about it. But when I got this book, I immediately thought of a few people because of the content and just how lovely it is. First of all, I thought about my son. My son used to be a biology major, and then he switched and became art history, and that's what he graduated in. But he loves wildlife and nature, and I think he would really appreciate it. And also, I thought about some of my booktuber friends, Mitzi at Mitzi Reads and Writes, and I want to say she told me she might have a copy of this. And then Farrah at Bookstalgic, and also Carly at Frog Lit. It really is a lovely book, and I'm looking forward to continuing to read it throughout the rest of 2024. Well, that's a wrap with everything I read in the month of February. As you can see, I had a lot of reading adventures. It was a fun reading month, a busy reading month. It didn't feel busy at the time, but now that I look at it, I'm like, wow, I got a lot accomplished in February. But I really do appreciate you stopping by, and as always, thank you for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. And until our paths cross again, stay amazing and be adventurous.